My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
So we're in the final stretch, and shortly, hours after this podcast is released, we will know the results of election 2025. Hello, I'm Brian Lilly. Welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. Joining me once again to break down the election are the people behind the Political Hack newsletter. If you haven't hit subscribe already, please do. Stuart Thompson is the Ottawa bureau chief for National Post. Tasha Kiernan is a columnist, commentator for the same said newspaper. And of course, I'm Brian Lilly, columnist at Toronto Sun. So, guys, any excitement left at the end of this as we see polls narrow, momentum's with the Conservatives, but is it too little too late?
I think everyone just wants this to be done. It's been a crazy short pack campaign. I honestly, watching the leaders, run around to the last place they go when we're trying to figure out, okay, does that mean this riding's in trouble? Poilievre was in Quebec City, Singh was in BC, Carney, I believe, is in Ontario. Is this desire to save the furniture, or is it winning ridings? Nobody knows. Everyone's analyzing it to pieces. But I think that there has been a tightening of the polls, slight one. So that adds a bit of piquant to the whole thing. Is like, could there be a surprise? Though I don't think there will be. I don't think that we'll see a surprise in who forms government, but the size of the government, I don't think is a given for me.
Stuart, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big number to look at right now is probably the Ontario polls, and the Conservatives are still down there. They're still down there in a way that makes it really hard for them to form government. And I think at this point, unless those polls are wrong, it's going to be really tough for Pierre Poilievre to form government. And now it's about stopping Carney from getting a majority.
Well, the latest numbers that we released from Post Media from Leger, our polling firm, over the weekend, just imagine this. Nationally, it's 43% for the Liberals, 39% for the Conservatives. Normally, 39% gets you a majority government. That's what Stephen Harper had to get his majority in 2011. Believe it or not, you would not know this by much of the media coverage, but Justin Trudeau's majority got slightly less than that in 2015. He still got a majority government. And nationally, the Conservatives at 39%. And some people will say, yeah, but they're tanking in Ontario. The Leger numbers, 40% for the Conservatives in Ontario. But the problem is that the Liberals are at 48% and the NDP is at 8%. That collapse of the NDP, or the collapse of the Bloc Québécois down to 25% in Quebec, incredibly difficult to analyze, to foresee, to be able to counter against. Normally, you get 40%, whether you're Jean Chrétien or Stephen Harper or Justin Trudeau, you're getting a majority.
Well, that's how Harper got one in 2011. And that wasn't, I will only say that was normal, because you had Jack Layton heading the NDP. They swept Quebec, right? That has never happened since and will never happen again, quite frankly. So that was, for the Conservatives, that's why the Conservatives with that percentage got a majority. The Liberals can get a majority with that percentage usually because their vote's more efficient. But the NDP is the factor here. Their vote has bled mostly to the Liberals, and the result is you don't have these splits in the GTA in particular that got Harper that majority for the Conservatives. So the Conservatives, I agree, they would need a much higher percentage because their vote is less efficient.
When I'm looking at how it breaks down, Stuart, we've talked a lot about this boomer versus younger voter. They asked things like, do you have high school education, college education, university education? What's your education level? University educated are more likely to vote for the Liberals than the Conservatives. But what's really interesting is labor force versus non-labor force. And people that are not in the labor force, about 6 points more likely to vote for the Liberals. So we're talking retirees. And then once you get into over 125,000 a year, so those making between 125 and 149 a year are voting for the Liberals 47% to 35% for the Conservatives. And over 150K a year are voting 52% for the Liberals, 36% for the Conservatives. I mean, what have we all been hearing our entire lives? The Conservatives only care about the rich. They're out there for the wealthy, Monopoly man, monocle, top hat, all of that. No, those guys are all voting for the Liberals. Once again, it's not the first time. Won't be the last.
Yeah, this is the Pierre Poilievre coalition is about people who the Canadian bargain isn't quite working out the way it was supposed to work out. And we knew that for a couple of years now, that those people who wanted to buy a house, they were told, when you're 35, you should have a full-time job and you can buy a house. And that's not how it worked out for them. People who I think thought healthcare should work a lot better, and they're saying, well, the government has taken in so many temporary immigrants that these things aren't working either. Those are the people that were saying Pierre Poilievre might be the guy to change that. And then this very interesting thing happened with Trump, where all these people who thought, the status quo works okay for me, I'm generally doing okay. It was then threatened by Trump, and now the status quo people are full of fear and motivation to vote. And I think that is kind of the story of this election, is you had these two factions, and then Trump just magnified one of them, and that was Carney's ticket to probably a win this evening on Monday night.
All right. The other day, I was filling in on News Talk 1010 here in Toronto, and was able to call up my old friend Daryl Bricker. He's the CEO of Global Public Affairs at Ipsos, biggest polling firm in the world. Daryl is, widely respected within the industry. And I said, are you guys in your industry, are you worried about a surprise with the polls tightening and the Conservatives having some momentum going into the last week? Because they can only poll up to a certain point, and then they have to stop. And he told me a couple of things. So I'll tell you, I'll summarize one thing that he said, and then we'll play the clip of the other thing that he said. The one thing that he said is that we're all talking to these people, and on a good day, 30% of them won't show up. There's some projections that will have 70% voter turnout, which would be the highest in years. So he said, at best, 30% don't show up, or could be more. He said, if the people that say they're voting a certain way don't show up to one party or the other, that messes with our projections. But then, and this is the clip we're going to play, he said that far more people now make up their minds in the last 72 hours. Here he is.
And one of the things that we know, so in case anybody's wondering when elections get decided, increasingly it's in the last 72 hours. And the reason for that is because partisan attachment isn't what it used to be. Old election campaigns used to be about identifying your vote rate at the start, because people really didn't change their mind very much, and just reminding them that they had to show up and do what they always wanted to do, which was vote for your party when election day came around. These days, it's not like that. People are making up their minds very late in the election campaign, and in most of our polls, and we do this globally, in the range of 5 to 10% actually make up their mind the day they're voting, or actually in the booth. So there's still a lot to play for, and the momentum at the moment is on the Conservative side.
So that 5 to 10% that make up their mind on voting day, and I don't know who these people are. I mean, who wakes up on voting day and says, yes, I've been listening for all this time, and I'm finally going to make up my mind. How those people break determines whether it's a liberal majority, a huge liberal majority, a liberal minority, or the best I think the Conservatives can hope for now is if it all breaks their way, and that's a big if, then we're looking at a Conservative minority. But to your point, Stuart, and we'll add into what Daryl just said to what you said, Poilievre's voting coalition, there's a lot of people that didn't vote before and probably aren't participating in polls and panels, which are to a degree self-selecting. So we could have a surprise one way or the other. It could. I think the most likely outcome right now as things tighten is a liberal minority, but we could see a big liberal majority or the Conservatives get the most seats. Would they form government? That's up in the air. Thoughts?
Yes, I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there is always the potential for a bit of a surprise. And those voters, I guess the question I would have is those voters, you said, that they've been following things and then at the last minute they make up their minds like, okay, now I'm going to decide. I think some of those voters are people who haven't been necessarily paying attention, but maybe think that they want to vote. It's their civic duty to vote. And they go in that voting booth and they're like, okay, pick one, right? Pick one.
Yeah.
I don't know how informed in quotes or news following these people are. So I think that to me, what the tradition's been of who goes and shows up is old people, right? Older Canadians go to the polls. That's what people say. Though for Trudeau in 2015, it wasn't true. Younger people made the difference for him. They made the difference for Obama in the U.S. because they went out to the polls more. So it really, I think it's a question of demographic mobilization. This is a very polarized election along class lines, economic lines, generational lines. So, numerically, there are more younger voters at this point than there are boomers, right? It tilted a few years ago. So, in theory, they could have the upper hand if they all showed up and voted Conservative. But because, again, goes back to the efficiency of the vote, I don't think it's enough for a majority Conservative government. Minority would be the ceiling. But, that could be the surprise if those people show up.
Another week of momentum like we've been seeing for the Conservatives, and maybe they could be talking about a majority. More of these Viagra ads at the golf course. I don't know about your thoughts on those.
No offense. Those are terrible.
But they're not aimed at you.
Yeah, not for you.
No, they're aimed at the men who golf, but I just don't. People have mocked them, but go on.
Lots of people have mocked them, but lots of people mock all kinds of ads that aren't aimed at them and end up working. So, look, I'm not the demographic it's aimed at.
Are they aimed at you?
No. One, I don't golf. Two, I'm not an older man. I know you describe yourself as an older woman, Tasha, but I don't describe myself as an older man. I only bring that up because you have brought it up before.
Yes.
But, I mean, interesting that they came out with those ads at the end. I was watching the Leaf Senators game the other night, and of course the Battle of Ontario is happening in the NHL, but really this election is the Battle of Ontario. The two parties are incredibly competitive in BC. Conservatives, dominating the prairies, the Liberals dominating Atlantic Canada, dominating to a degree in Quebec. We'll see how the splits go on that, and if the Bloc has this resurgence. It comes down to Ontario. And so in the most important hockey game in Ontario, you're seeing a battle of ads of Carney, not versus Poilievre, but versus Harper. And to me, those Harper ads are aimed at the same guys as that golf Viagra ad. It's to try and get the older male demographic back to them. Is that a strategy that can work? I mean, I've heard the ad campaigns of both parties described as horrible this election. I don't know about your thoughts, Stuart, but do these Harper ads of him saying, hey, I'm the guy who did it and trust me, does that change anything?
I would say that is not that it's going to work, but I think it is their best hope because the people they're trying to reach are older men who probably voted for Harper 2, maybe 3 times and were definitely there in 2011. And these are the guys. I talked to a conservative who said, the trouble, we always hear is he never had a real job about Pierre Poilievre. That line of attack actually does stick particularly with those older men who see him as kind of a young upstart guy who kind of rubs them the wrong way. And I think Harper is supposed to be the antidote to that. Harper is the guy who's been around. He was Poilievre's boss, and he's here to give him a reference to say, look, this guy worked really hard. I actually like him a little bit more than Carney. And I think that is what they're going for. I don't know if it'll work just because the Trump thing is so all-consuming. And I know that...
Well, for some, yeah.
For those guys,
and especially those voters.
Those guys who their RSPs are full of stuff that's market exposed, and they're worried about that right now. So I think that is what they're trying to do. If you're a conservative, though, you have to look at Ontario in particular and say, look, can we exist in this world where our entire electoral hopes hinge on how the NDP does? A lot of this, I think if you're a conservative, I spoke to people halfway through the campaign who said in a vacuum, everything went very smoothly. Our events were great. Our message was what we wanted it to be. We didn't have any big gaffes, and it didn't do anything because everything that was taking us down was external. And I think that's, if you're the Conservatives, a bad place to be because you don't control your own fate. You need Jagmeet Singh to be good at politics before you get a majority. Tasha, you're wagging your finger at me, so maybe you just want
to...
Hold on. Let me ask Tasha about the ads, and we'll come back to that NDP thing in a moment, because that's a big point. But Tasha, those competing ads in the hockey game aimed at those 55-plus men. Stephen Harper was the one with the energy in them. And then you had Mark Carney, who had all the energy of an undertaker. And, I've heard it described as a resume contest for this demographic that they're both after right now. So why not have someone with a pulse narrate an ad about how great Mark Carney is? I mean, back to the fact that ads for both of them have not been great. Why not have someone narrate, Mark Carney was the man who did this in a world gone mad? Something like that.
Because Carney's a grown-up. I actually think the Harper ad is kind of paternalistic. It's like, look, he worked for me. I'm the grown-up, but I can give him a reference. Here, Skippy. Like, honestly, I don't think it's effective because I think it reminds...
But those Carney ads are not effective at all. They put you to sleep.
Yeah, but that's the point. That is the point, actually, Brian. People want to be put to sleep and keep their RSPs. That is actually the point for this demographic. And Carney can't be something he's not. He can't be Mr. Excitement. It would be fake. It would be inauthentic. So,
but you have someone else narrate it. Use some exciting footage.
But that's not what... Okay, you're missing the point. The idea is that Carney is the man of a situation. L'homme de la situation. He's the man of a situation. The man of a situation doesn't need someone to narrate for him. And so I think that is what they're doing. That's why Carney's been, he's been making tons of mistakes in his press conferences. He says things the wrong, he puts his foot in his mouth. He basically lies about how the conversation with Donald Trump went, and people give him a pass. Why? Because you know what? The guy he's a new politician and he's trying, but he's been around the block. He worked with Stephen Harper, not for Stephen. Okay, this is the difference, right? He worked with Stephen Harper, not for Stephen Harper. Poilievre arguably worked for Stephen Harper. And again, I think it goes to the demographic they're trying, which is older men will look at this and go, he's like me. I'm as boring as him. I'm going to vote for him. And they have assets to protect. And they don't trust Poilievre to do it. And I think that's where these ads are coming at people from. I don't know how effective any ad is at this point, honestly, with just hours to go, or when these ads ran days to go. But I think that's the theory is Carney's the adult in the room. So he doesn't need another adult with him. That is, I think, their theme from the beginning.
All right, let's talk about that NDP as a lifeline. I was talking with some Ontario Conservatives, and I don't want to get into the whole Doug Ford versus Pierre Poilievre thing, that's kind of died down. I was even at a taping of The Curse of Politics, a live taping the other night, and Corey tonight did not take any shots at Pierre Poilievre. I asked Corey how crazy it was going to get before the event, and it did not get crazy at all. But was speaking with folks who were not on that, but were part of the campaign, and they just said, look, we had to be really cognizant of making sure that the NDP were not beaten down, and in fact, do some things to keep them around. I get going after Jagmeet maybe a year ago, even 6 months ago, and we can all say, yes, they were too effective in tying him to Trudeau's coalition, I doubt they could have seen that the Jagmeet Singh voters would go for these. The guy running Brookfield Asset Management, owner of 43 private hospitals in Australia and New Zealand, that just doesn't seem like a thing for a New Democrat to do. But, I mean, it really is the story of this election, is the NDP fleeing to a safe harbor.
I think that what the Conservatives failed to do is two things. One, they bet the farm on Trudeau. They wanted an election with Trudeau there, which is why they were pushing so hard for one in the fall. And Jagmeet Singh has now said, oh, well, I didn't give it to them. People say that was his biggest strategic mistake, is not calling an election before Christmas, when the NDP would have probably done better because Trudeau would have been there. And he said, well, I did it because I didn't want a conservative majority. I couldn't live with that. So I'm going to torch my own party.
Isn't that a firing offense that you would torch your own party over this?
Yes, it is. He's gone, Brian. There's no question. After this election, Jagmeet Singh's obituary is already being written. But I got to say to you, and I will say this on the record, in Ontario, people maybe aren't, maybe Corey Tonight's not saying anything, but people are already talking about leadership. I know personally people who have been approached by groups who are organizing without a candidate in mind specifically, but names are floating around saying we got to move on this. And this is
okay. Well, give us some names. Give us some names.
Some names. I'm not going to out my friends. I'm not. No, I believe them though. I mean, there's no reason for them to say I've been approached by other people. The names that are floating around are no secret. Like you said, Doug Ford is one of the names that people are thinking of, but he's not running. This is to be really clear. People who are unhappy and dissatisfied and are trying to look even beyond the election now, which is, to me, that I was shocked by that too, because I'm thinking, everyone was supposed to be so gung-ho on this. So to me, that's another story in this election. So conservative disunity. Never mind the NDP. Conservatives biting themselves.
If the Liberals win a majority, Doug Ford is not running to be Conservative leader federally because he cannot stomach the idea of being opposition leader. It would kill him.
I'm not, like I said, it's not that Doug Ford is running. It's not that he's organizing, but it's a name that people have said, oh, well, why not him? Caroline Mulroney, another name. They said, why not her? I've even heard Stephen Lecce, no lie. So, these names are floating around. The point is this, that they're floating around and people are putting their noses to the grindstone and doing the campaign work, and they're talking about that. That, to me, speaks volumes also about what this election is, which is the Conservative Party is fractured because people had such high expectations and they're not being met.
I don't know if you heard this at Canada Strong and Free, Stuart, but I had Mark Mulroney, Ben Mulroney, Caroline Mulroney all put forward to me.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the three of them are interested in running. Ben has told me directly that he has no interest. Caroline doesn't like campaigning. And Mark, for people that don't know Mark Mulroney, he's a banker at Scotiabank making really good money and going off skiing with his kids. Yeah, his kids are grown now. Maybe later. I don't see it happening now. What about that Tim Houston video, though, Stuart?
Yeah.
Was that just a raw Nova Scotia video, or hey, there might be a job opening?
I gotta say, it certainly took everyone's interest. But I'm a Nova Scotian, and I don't think people realize how different a PC in Nova Scotia is from a conservative in Alberta or even a conservative in Ontario. And it is a weird province. It's culturally conservative in all the rural areas, probably more so than anywhere else in Canada, including Alberta. But then it also just has this different kind of progressive conservative vein that Tim Houston is a perfect example of. And actually, Darrell Dexter, the former NDP premier, was a good example of, because these guys are all the same in Nova Scotia. Every premier is exactly the same ideologically. So I just don't think that works federally. I certainly thought when I saw that video that maybe Tim Houston wants to give it a try. But as you said, I think this is maybe worth reiterating that being a federal opposition leader kind of sucks. If Mark Carney wins a majority, it's going to really suck. And right now, Doug Ford and Tim Houston are running provinces, and that's really fun, and you get a lot of power when you do that. So I am a little skeptical of premiers when they're bandied about here, but the video was interesting, and the timing was certainly interesting.
Well, if there's a minority, that potentially changes things for maybe someone like a Tim Houston. I don't know about Doug Ford. He is, again, he's the master of his domain. Like, why would he want to go into opposition even for a couple of years, unless, he sees that ambitious to do it. But I think that if it's a liberal minority, that changes things in terms of people who might want to take that role on.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the fact that platforms have dropped and question whether they matter at all. More in moments.
And now, two pigeons bemoaning the fact you can choose the TV you want with DirecTV.
So now they can pick out their favorite entertainment when they sign up and save money?
You mean if you like sports?
You can get a sports pack.
What about entertainment?
Entertainment pack.
It's like finding an old pizza with your favorite toppings, which for me would be pineapple and toenails.
Pineapple?
Pay for the TV you want, not the TV you don't. Genre pack starting at $34.99 a month. Visit DirecTV.com for more information. New residential customers only. Local channels vary by market. Services renew monthly unless you cancel online. Credit card required. Restrictions apply.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original. Which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Tasha Stewart, since we last talked, all the major parties have released their platforms. I guess a big question is, does it matter? I've seen some polling that says Conservatives look to the party platform when deciding who to vote for. Liberals look to the leader. So maybe these platforms don't matter. I actually hate fully costed platforms because I think they're a lie from beginning to end. Nobody ever sticks to them. Do they matter? I mean, Carney and Jagmeet Singh both released theirs on Saturday, and then there was all this criticism of that Pierre Poilievre waited so long to release his. Like, what, 2 days later? Like, they all released them late this time. I'm not sure that platforms matter in the best of elections, and I really don't think they matter in this election, Stuart.
Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, I mean, we now know that 7.5 million Canadians voted on the weekend, so they didn't have time to look at the platforms anyways. And there was a huge batch of people who voted on Friday before they came out. And I also think that even if people had been giving weeks to read the platforms, 0.01% of Canadians would have actually looked at the document, and a small percentage would have actually read news stories about it. And I think those Canadians are right, because I agree with you, Brian, that this is all kind of BS, because most of those projections are torqued, and most of the fantasies around growth are just enough to pay for your tax cut. And, these things always tend to work out that way. And it's worth noting, Poilievre has said this as a criticism, but it is true that this is a Justin Trudeau platform that was given to Mark Carney. And
I think it was Catherine Levesque, who works in your shop, who reported that it was Mona Fortier, the MP for Ottawa-Vanier, who drew up this platform months ago, and then they just did, Control-C, Control-V.
Yeah, Mona was bragging about it. So she said, look, we got this whole platform. We're just going to give it to whoever the winner is. This was on the day of the vote, the Liberal leadership vote. And then when it came out, she sent a note to her volunteers saying, hey, we have this thing. I did it. I was part of this platform team. So I think that is worth noting. And it kind of shows you the charade that's being played here, is that this is a document that was ready to go. Mark Carney signed his name to it. And I think probably a Mark Carney budget will be very different.
Will it be different? I mean, Liberals don't seem bothered by the fact that he's going to blow past every single fiscal anchor that they've ever had, Tasha. I know that you won't be bothered because you're worried about your RSPs and your home.
I am bothered. You don't read my column, apparently. I am bothered. I wrote about this.
I did read your column, but I'm teasing you. It's fun.
No, I am worried, and it's disappointing to see this platform because a lot of people were thinking, oh, blue liberal, Mark Carney, banker, blah, blah. And that sort of stereotype that he would be more prudent with the nation's finances. And instead, this is a huge, big spending budget that also includes a couple of, sleight of hand measures, which is splitting operating and capital expenses into two buckets. So your accounting looks better on the, let's balance the operational side. But the capital side could just rack itself up. And the result is you're going to increase debt at a rate that's higher than a current ratio to GDP. And that's going to blow our credit rating. And, economists are weighing in on that already. And so I look at this, I'm like, this is not good. But it's falling at a time when most people will not be paying attention. Had it dropped earlier, the Conservatives could have marketed this as a legitimate evidence that Carney is Trudeau is Carney on this. They could have really run that for at least a week. They would have run it during the debates. They would have been like, here's the proof. You've given it to us. But they can't because it dropped during the Easter weekend and no one paid attention. And then they dropped theirs and everyone paid attention to things they were going to cut. And so they were busy defending that or discussing that and being accused of being Trump-light. So at the end of the day, these platforms, like you said also, what will they mean? There's so many unknowns, in particular, the rate of growth, which I think both of them are overestimating, quite frankly, and the pace of tariffs. We don't know when they're going to come down. So are they worth the paper they're written on? Probably not. But they give an indication of where these two parties would go and the two leaders would go. And Carney is definitely going in the same vein that Trudeau has been going for the last decade.
Want to play a clip here of Carney reacting to criticism by economist Trevor Tombe of the University of Calgary. Now, I've tussled with Trevor online. I've cited his work at times. He's well regarded. The current Liberal government has cited his work many times to justify their plans or their spending. But, he is someone who's been critical of them as well. And so Tombe was being critical, saying they're dropping their fiscal anchors. They're going away from the things they said that would guide them. And when Carney was asked about this, I'm going to play the quick bit in French where the reporter says, "Is Trevor Tombe wrong?" And those who can understand, like Tasha, will hear him say, "Yes, I know more than him. This has to be said." And then Tom Perry from CBC, who is one of the nicest guys in the gallery, right up there with Stewart, asks a follow-up. And Carney is dismissive and arrogant yet again. Roll clip.
So Trevor Tombe is wrong, in your opinion? Yes. I have more experience than he does, and it's important to state that.
With CBC, I'd like to follow up on that. Just if you've got an economist like Trevor Tombe saying that your plan is unsustainable, is just that. Is there an argument that if Pierre Poilievre is trying to bring down spending, bring down the deficit, that his plan is more fiscally responsible than yours?
Okay. There's one thing that you can write on a paper. There's another thing that will happen in the economy. Okay. So, our plan, to be clear, is focused on investment and growing this economy. All of the spending, all of the investment in years 3 and 4 are for growing the economy.
All right. So is that a good look for Carney? Like, economists can dispute, but if you're going to just give the back of the hand to an academic who works with the government, who's been cited by the government, who is widely respected, and you're just like, I know more than him. Right? Can you imagine what question period's going to be like if this guy becomes prime minister?
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I will never forget that. It's the same, but it is. And Carney has to temper that. He has a tendency to arrogance that has come out in some of his interactions with media. In this case, the lack of respect given to Trevor Tombe. It is a side of him that is not a good look for any politician. That was Trudeau's Achilles heel, was arrogance. And in that respect, also, he does echo that. So he should be more careful. At this, again, will that make a difference at this point? I mean, I'm sure Trevor Tombe didn't appreciate it, but voters, that will wear on voters eventually. I don't think it's got enough time right now, and the stakes are just people are voting for different issues. But if you have years of that, yes, we know from Trudeau that after a while gets on people's nerves.
And look, I've heard the criticism, Stuart, that, Poilievre is dismissive of media, but generally when Poilievre has been dismissive of media, it's like that guy in the apple orchard who was just showing up with questions like, well, some say you're just like Donald Trump. And he's like, well, who says that? Well, some say, well, you're taking a page out of Trump's book. What page? Like, he's pushing back against questions that are unfair or loaded. This is just here's an economist that says this. How do you react? I know more than him. It's an arrogance and aggressiveness that both he and Poilievre can have, but that he in particular does not enjoy any questioning or criticism.
Yeah, and it is worth actually looking at the content of the dispute, which is that Trevor Tombe was saying the fiscal anchors are gone, which is objectively true in this platform. This is a platform that increases deficits beyond what even Justin Trudeau was going to do. So
beyond what the PBO said Justin Trudeau's numbers would lead to.
Yeah, and that you need to answer for that. And Carney's response, I think, deserves more scrutiny. And I think actually maybe this, I don't want to chalk this up to like Machiavellian political strategy, but the dispute and the shot at Trevor kind of takes away from this actual discussion about the content of his platform, because Carney's response was, well, look at my resume. Can't you tell from my resume that I'm right about this and Trevor Tombe is wrong? When we're literally just talking about numbers that are on the page. So I think it is bad. And I have heard from liberals that, partly because Carney has a tendency towards this, but partly because they believe the Conservatives have given them a little more permission to do this kind of stuff that they wouldn't dare do before, because they felt like it would come back on them harder than it does to Poilievre. And I think actually they're getting away with it.
Well, yeah, I think the Poilievre orchard, I personally find his pushing back against reporters in that context, he wants to be clever, and some people in his electorate appreciate that. I do find it offensive, and I find it lowers the bar, and it gives permission exactly to get away with stuff like Carney when he treats media badly too. And Trump's the one who started this, and Pierre Poilievre did not start this. But in that respect, they're both, they're both letting the standards slip. You shouldn't do that, and if you don't like a question, you don't put on the smarm and push back like he did. I've seen Trudeau Senior push back, that famous exchange where Pierre Elliott Trudeau pushed back against, I believe it was Tim Rice, over the October crisis, and he questioned him in a similar way. But it wasn't so facile. I'll say it was actually intelligent. It was not facile and obnoxious, which I find the apple orchard thing personally very obnoxious.
Having been on the receiving end of politicians who don't like my questions, I can tell you that Donald Trump did not start this. I was sent by an editor as a young reporter to question Premier Lucien Bouchard with a very stupid question. And he made me feel about an inch tall and made me shrink away. And I learned, don't ask dumb questions. That's what I learned from that. So I get what you're saying about lowering the bar, but I'll also say this. I don't have a problem with any politician pushing back against dumb, bad, or loaded questions from journalists.
Yeah, but define dumb question. When you when you say the reporter, like Trump will say, your outfit is garbage. I don't, you guys are fake news.
But the guy,
how can you even go
the guy
there,
in
right?
the apple orchard just showing up and say, some people say you're like Trump.
It's true.
What kind of a question is that?
No, but
why
is that a wrong question? People do say that.
He quietly said who and how, and the guy couldn't say anything. Like, you've got to show up with your ammo if you're going to ask a question. You've got to be able to back up your question. And so, we'll leave it at that because we got to keep talking about the election rather than who's worse to journalists at any given moment. As I said, I've been on the receiving end from all kinds. So if we end up with anything but a majority government, somebody needs to find a dance partner. And given the state of the NDP, it looks like if either of the two main parties form a minority, there's only one dance partner. And it's a smooth-talking guy from Quebec named Yves-François Blanchet. He'll be sitting pretty. This is his closing argument, isn't it, Tasha? That, hey, vote for me. I'm going to hold all the balance of power.
Mais oui. That is what he's saying now. And he said it on Tout le monde en parle, which is the most watched French sort of political / culture / talk show every Sunday night. in Quebec, and he said basically yes, that it's time to come home. Carney's got it. He's gonna win. Time to come home and vote for the Bloc. It's safe. We won't get a conservative government. You'll get a liberal government, but you need us to keep them honest. And that is his pitch. It's been echoed by Paul-Saint-Pierre Plamondon, who's the head of the PQ in Quebec, also has come out and said, got to vote Bloc. Liberals, Carney's a danger to the unity of the country. He said that this week.
Albertans are saying that too, I hear.
But yeah, well, this is the funny. It's a common cause, right? But this is the card the Bloc has to play. It's one of the few they have to play because they will never form government. But if they can be the NDP of the next few years, well, look what the NDP got. A lot of stuff done for them, right? A lot of chantage, as you would say, blackmail. So they want to do the same thing. And that's what they're saying. And, we'll see. We'll see if it works. But what it does, though, it could suppress the vote generally, because if people think it's done, they may just not go out and vote at all. So they might not go out and vote for the Bloc. They'll just stay home, period. Or
they might not go vote for the Liberals.
Correct. Well, they just won't go vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The NDP is making the same claim as well, Stuart. Is Jagmeet Singh being as effective with this message? I mean, he's almost got as much nationally as the Bloc has with just one province in terms of percentage of the popular vote. So I would argue no, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's rough for Jagmeet out there. And I think Tash is exactly right, because I heard that argument from an NDPer the other day, that it's an impossible argument to make. The strategic voting thing where you say, please follow your heart and vote for us because the Liberals have this locked up, then you just deactivate those voters. And I will say it is looking, if it's a minority, it's looking very likely the Bloc holds the balance of power. And if Mark Carney was worried about fiscal anchors at all up until Saturday, then I think that's going to also go out the window, because it's just like the governing with the NDP is the way you do it is by ponying up cash and policies and letting them do pet projects. And I think that is, if that's 2 years if that's the next 2 years is that kind of stuff on Parliament Hill, then if you think the fiscal situation is bad now, it's going to get worse.
But both of you are saying this deactivates those voters. That's the way the Liberals are winning right now, is with extra support from the NDP and the Bloc. If those voters are deactivated, they're reduced to a minority, or the Conservatives have a minority.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why this election is fascinating. As they say, it's why we play the game. You got to, you can't just say, the Chiefs are going to win on Sunday. You got to play the game.
Yeah. I'll just tell you, Brian, you may have heard this from Doug Ford's people, but I heard that their internals were 5 or 6 points higher than what it ended up being on Election Day, and they blamed that almost entirely on that effect. People said, they're going to win anyways, so I'm going to cook dinner tonight instead of voting. That's a big effect.
That and the NDP deciding to put all of their efforts into keeping incumbents, which the federal party is now trying to do as well. They're not trying to pick up anybody else. Okay, last quick point. In the possibility that the Conservatives form a minority, they still have the same dance partner. Stephen Harper was successfully able in 2006 to go between the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc. If the NDP is reduced to nothing, he's going to have the Liberals who will not want to work with him, and the Bloc who are, not going to want to pass certain things. It's much more difficult, isn't it?
100%. It's going to be a shorter minority government, I think. The Bloc will look to see, they'll seize the opportunity to make gains, because I think they're going to be reduced. Their numbers are going to be reduced as well in this election. They were 33 when it closed. Right now, projections for seats are like 23, 25. And Blanchet has said, I'd love, 25 is okay, but I'd love 35. He'd love to get more. So I think for him, it would be a waiting game of opportunity and a shorter window than if you had the Liberals in there potentially. I don't know. I mean, the Liberals are probably more likely to make a deal with Blanchet, because Blanchet just says he doesn't like the Conservatives. So,
Stuart?
Yeah, actually, I spoke to a Conservative in the War Room about that, and they said, don't totally rule out the possibility of a pure hung parliament where you can't actually make a deal, and then we go to the polls again in a few months. That's how tough it could be for the Conservatives.
That's so bad for the country. That is a terrible thing, especially at this juncture when we need to negotiate with the Americans, show strength. It's actually the worst outcome, frankly.
Going to be a fascinating Monday. Anybody that tells you it's over, You know, as I said, this is why we have the elections. It's why we play the game. It's why we count every single vote. Thanks, both of you, for joining me throughout the election campaign. We'll probably do this one more time to wrap it all up, and we'll see the results on Monday night. Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Make sure that you're hitting that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Apple, on Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Help us out by leaving us a review and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. Castro would end up occupying a space in the Trudeau family similar to that of a beloved uncle. They went diving. They smoked cigars together. They gathered sea urchins for beach cookouts.
Informal talks at an island hideaway intensified their respect for each other, and their mutual enjoyment of skin diving added to the rapport.
In addition to a well-publicized 1976 summit meeting, Trudeau took 3 separate vacations to visit Castro after his time in politics had ended.
I can make, just one reference to Pierre Trudeau's sons to show the closeness of the relationship. The nickname that the Trudeau sons had for Fidel Castro was Papa Fidel. So that gives you an indication of the closeness of the bond that existed between a communist dictator, thorn in the side of every American administration for the past 50 years, and Pierre Trudeau.
When Trudeau's youngest son, Michel, died in an avalanche in 1998, Castro called the family in tears to express his condolences. As an 8-year-old, Michel had referred to Fidel Castro as his best friend. When Pierre died, Fidel declared 3 days of mourning in Cuba and flew to Montreal to act as an honorary pallbearer.
Every time Trudeau went down to Cuba, all the people in South Florida, the exiles, were thinking, why is this Western leader giving comfort to a murderous dictator, who is oppressing their people in Cuba, and saying, good things about Fidel Castro? And as I've mentioned, to have him in the pew at Trudeau's funeral in the front row, as a dignified person when he had been such a brutal leader, says more about Pierre Trudeau than it does about Fidel Castro.
Here's where we should probably touch on what Castro had done and what he was continuing to do while going on beach vacations with the Trudeau family. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.